It was fun while it lasted, but it's time to regroup for next season. The Los Angeles Kings are eliminated by the Edmonton Oilers, and they're going home. We're going to talk about the end of the Kings season on today's episode of Locked On Los Angeles Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Locked On Los Angeles Kings, your favorite podcast about your favorite hockey team, the Los Angeles Kings, as we ease into the postseason now. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. My name is Sarah, host of this show, and as always, glad to be here with you to talk about the Kings. I was hoping that we could have had, not quite miracle, but like some good news, and that I would have been able to continue talking to you on this show about postseason hockey, but the Kings, when it came down to Game 7, just did not have it, and could not overcome Connor McDavid. Basically, it was Connor McDavid. Like, that's about it, honestly. And their season's over. Instead, we get the Battle of Alberta instead of the Darryl Sutter Bowl. We very almost, in some alternate universe, this next round of the playoffs is Kings versus Stars, which I feel like everyone was like, oh, God, no, about, and I would have been like, that's amazing. We might be able to beat them. But no, instead we've got Battle of Alberta in the Western Conference, this chunk of the Western Conference, the Pacific Division, to see who goes on to take on the winner of Colorado and St. Louis, a.k.a. who's going to go play Colorado. On today's show, we're going to take a look at the Kings. They've done their exit interviews today. Rob Blake has spoken earlier today as well, so I want to talk about some news that we did learn throughout those presentations, I guess, interviews. We'll call it interviews. So we'll talk about that today. We'll give tomorrow's show over to the Reign. Their postseason also ended very abruptly at the hands of the Colorado Eagles. We'll talk about the Reign and what happened with them on tomorrow's show because they also kind of deserve their own post-season eulogy, I guess we could say. But we will turn first to the Kings, who they're going home. They're done. They're going to go hang out, recover, recuperate, deal with their many injuries that have been sustained. Probably the biggest news that we learned out of the Kings post-season interview things was we got a little bit more detail on the very nebulous Viktor Arvidsson injury, which has turned out to be a herniated disc. He's going to need surgery. The timeline is something like 3 to 5 months. Rob Blake at the press conference said that the surgery is going to be tomorrow. And the matter flared up literally like right at the beginning of practice before playoffs started. So it wasn't necessarily something that he'd been dealing with long term. It wasn't necessarily something that, he just kept putting off until there was no other choice. I mean, or if that is the case, that's not how it was reported. But unfortunate that he was not able to, unfortunate that it happened in general, that, his body was like, nah, son. And hopefully, that 3 to 5 month timetable, 3 months would put him into July-ish, August. 5 months would put him a little closer to the start of the regular season. So hopefully he is good and ready to go back at the start of the season. I think that, it's a little underestimated maybe how much the Kings missed him, particularly on helping to drive offense on that second line. Obviously, Arvidsson being out required a lot of other players to have to shift around. I think getting him back next season will really help the Kings get a better picture of what their offense is going to look like and, again, help keep players slotted in the lineup where they should be and not necessarily having to get bumped up. They fared fine in his absence, but you have to think that, his speed, his hands, his kind of chaotic gremlin energy on the ice would have definitely had some impact for the Kings in terms of goal scoring, particularly when they desperately needed goals in, Game 7. So wishing for the best for Viktor Arvidsson. Hopefully that surgery goes fine. I've never had a herniated disc, but it seems awful, especially as someone who does a very physical job. So hoping that everything goes well for him, and we get him back at the start of the season. And I hate like when teams are like, yes, this thing worked once, so we're going to do it again forever. But Danault, Arvidsson, Moore worked so well as a trio. They were so impactful that you really have to hope that they start out with that. Unless something, really fantastic happens in training camp and someone, blows someone away, or, obviously you don't want injuries to happen. So, but you have to be prepared for anything. But I would really hope that trio starts out together in training camp and has every opportunity to be able to repeat and build on their success from last season. We also learned Alex Iafallo was dealing with a shoulder injury. Rob Blake, in his interviews, specified that 3 players had been playing through separated shoulders, which is bad. Don't do that. Iafallo didn't confirm that he was one of those, but he did confirm that he had a shoulder problem. And if we think about a lot of the criticism that has been leveled at Iafallo and that his play had really kind of fallen off and he wasn't as effective as he was before, as always, the discovery that someone is playing through some sort of injury that he probably in other circumstances wouldn't or shouldn't be playing through, I think sheds a little bit of light on maybe why we weren't getting the same results from Alex Iafallo that we were used to getting in past seasons. Even earlier in the season, he had that really hot start and then just tapered off from there. Drew Doughty, of course, spoke as well at the exit interview event, confirmed he had a tendon tear in his wrist. He said that he, in true Drew Doughty fashion, said that he would have basically forced his hand, pun not intended, to return early had the Kings advanced to the conference finals, and he said definitely for the Stanley Cup finals. He basically was like, I don't care what anyone says, I don't care what anyone tells me, I would have come back. I would have basically like made them let me come back. And it's one of those things where like I've talked a lot on this show with various guests and on my own as well about how we want these players to respect their bodies. We want these players to all have lives after hockey, and the continued insistence of many hockey players and many teams on making guys come back before they're ready, or before they maybe they should maybe have a couple extra weeks off and they come back anyway, has really contributed to a lot of the problems we see with guys in their post-playing careers, with people who end up with substance abuse issues because of pain management and improper care essentially during their careers. So, there's the one hand that sees Drew Doughty say, I would have come back no matter what. I don't care what anyone would have told me, and gets really like not upset, I guess, at that, because it's your wrist isn't the same as your back or your knees or whatever, but you still don't want to risk additional further injury, or especially for a player like Doughty, who his hands are one of his greatest aspects, as a defenseman who chips in on offense all the time, and if you damage your wrist because you decided to come back early from a wrist injury, that's going to impact you in the future. So on the one hand, like, I hate it. I hate that he's just out there coming right out and saying, I would have come back no matter what. I don't care. No one was going to stop me. But, as a fan, you're hearing that and you're like, man, this guy is so committed. And that's why they do it. That's why they play when they're not supposed to play and they come back when they're not supposed to come back. But that's the Drew Doughty we know. That's the Drew Doughty we have always known with this team, is he is a guy who only is going to listen to Drew Doughty, and he has been one of the loudest voices over the past few years about the Kings and their status in the rebuild, and as we've talked about before, was kind of one of the guys who was loudest about, okay, Rob Blake, like, we want you to trust us, bring in new people this offseason, help build the team around what we've got so we can, advance where we're at in this rebuild. And so Drew Doughty's doing what Drew Doughty's going to do. He is making a stink. He is going to listen to nobody, and that's sort of the end of the story for Drew Doughty. Like, he does not care what you think or what a doctor thinks or what anyone else thinks. So I love it and I hate it. Like, you really want him to be looking out for his own physical health, but I get it. Your team's in the Stanley Cup final. Your team's in the conference final, in a position where no one expected them to be. I know hockey players are always like, yeah, every year we think we can win the cup. So, like, I get it that they're all telling themselves that, but no one else would have thought that. So I get it of like, wow, we made this improbable run. I'm absolutely coming back. And like 65% of Drew Doughty is better than 0% of Drew Doughty. So even if he was slightly limited, he would have found ways to contribute and it would have been good. But glad that he gets to rest unimpeded, uninterrupted by any sort of long run. He said he'll be ready for camp next season and is really excited to go. We'll talk about some more things that we've learned in the exit interviews next on the show. But first, BetOnline continues to be the number one source for all of your sports betting needs and sports information. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including information on this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. Whatever it is you're into, hockey specifically, they're constantly releasing updated odds for the next round. You can go on right now and see where things fall for who's going to win the Stanley Cup. You can check it out, place some wagers. If you feel like, you want to say, let's all root for Edmonton. We want our team to have lost to the team that won the cup. You can go do that on BetOnline. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. So whenever all of the announcements about players joining Men's Worlds started to come at the end of the regular season, I kind of sat back for a second and I was like, it feels really weird to not have any Kings players playing for their respective countries in Men's Worlds. Like the past however many years, that's really all we had to entertain ourselves with in the postseason while everyone else was having fun chasing the Stanley Cup. We were like, oh, is Adrian Kempe going to win another medal with Team Sweden or something? And it felt weird this year to not have to go through that. But the Kings' early exit did clear the path for at least one player to go and join his country, and that is Carl Grundstrom. And I'm really excited for this because I felt like his playoffs, as I said in earlier shows, like I feel like playoff Carl Grundstrom is very different from regular season Carl Grundstrom. And I feel like he might be coming out of this run with some confidence. And I feel like getting the chance to play with his national team, even if he doesn't get a ton of minutes, whatever, I think will be really good for him and kind of help him blossom, help him show what he has on that level as well. So I'm excited for Carl Grundstrom. I'm excited to keep up with Team Sweden as they go through the World's competition and see how he does there. But always glad for players to get the chance, and always glad for it to be players that you don't necessarily expect to be getting the nod to go and join their national teams. So congrats to Carl Grundstrom. Really excited to hear that news come out of today's conferences. Some of the other big news, not necessarily big news, but updates that were given out were about Alex Edler, who, as we all know, had that just really terrible leg, ankle, whatever fracture. And when he came back in, maybe came back a little early, was in and out of the lineup for a little bit. It was clear that he just wasn't quite up to speed. But I really enjoyed this anecdote that was shared at the exit conference about Edler. Rob Blake mentioned in talking about Edler in sort of wrapping up, he was very complimentary of his play and just his character, his personality. He reported that Alex Edler himself went personally to Todd McLellan and asked to play whenever there were so many injuries out on the blue line. Edler had been, again, kind of in and out of the lineup, and he came back right around that same time. And you could tell watching him that he maybe wasn't quite ready, wasn't quite up to speed, that he probably could have benefited from a little bit more practice time or just rehab time, getting his legs back under him, getting his speed and his conditioning up and everything. But same with the issue of Drew Doughty being like, I'm going to come back no matter what. I don't care. I feel like Edler may be a little bit different. He'd been kind of long reported to be right on the cusp of coming back. Maybe came back and took on more minutes than he would have, but a similar sort of, character there in terms of saying like, the team needs me. I can do this. Like, put me in coach. It's literally like, put me in coach is essentially what he did. And I think that really resonated, especially knowing how long he has been in this league and how long he has been searching for that Stanley Cup of his own as well with Vancouver, and seeing him really, really take on that role of veteran presence, mentor to the guys on the blue line, especially when they were so young this year. I think was really great. He, I would have loved to see what he could have done without that injury, and really without the injuries to all of the blue line. Our thoughts on Alex Edler, everyone assumed going in that he was going to be like 6th, 7th defenseman, was going to get rotated in and out. And instead he had to step up and take on probably more responsibility than he had thought he was going to for this team. And he did really well. I think that he was a very good, steady presence back there on the blue line, especially with all those kids, like I said. And I know he just signed that 1-year deal, but if they wanted to bring him back, like, I don't think anyone would complain. There is always going to be the issue of, creating the logjam of players. We've already got too many defensemen as it is, who could fight for NHL spots, who are going to need waivers to go back down to the AHL if you don't have a spot for them. We saw flashes from Jacob Mobrari, from Austin Strand this year. Jordan Spence obviously came in during the regular season and didn't look out of place. So is there necessarily room for an Alex Edler return on the blue line? Maybe not, but if they find room for him, if they find a way to keep him, I certainly wouldn't object to bringing him back, as long as he, is on the same page about the role that he's going to play for the team. A couple more things we've learned coming out of this exit interview coming up next on the show. But first, let's talk Built Bar. I actually, while I was sitting around prepping for the show, getting ready to record, I actually had a little snack, and that little snack was a Built Bar. And if you don't know what Built Bars are, they are super delicious. They are good for you, and they come in a ton of different flavors. They're protein bars that taste like candy bars. They're covered in 100% chocolate, and if you're looking for something to spice up your day, if you're looking for some energy, if you're looking for a snack so maybe your stomach doesn't grumble while you're recording a podcast, Built Bars are there for you. One of their great new flavors, I just tried this one the other day, and I can report back that it does taste indeed exactly like what it's called. It's the Birthday Cake Puff, which is a white chocolate-covered marshmallow protein-infused delight. Has little sprinkles on it and everything. It basically is birthday cake icing sort of in a protein bar form, and the best thing is that it's actually good for you. It's got 150 calories, 9 grams of sugar. Built Bars are high in fiber, high in protein, low in carbs, and they'll fit in with whatever your own personal diet food journey is. So go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. The mood coming out of the Kings room in their exit interviews seemed generally positive. I mean, obviously everyone there is disappointed that they weren't able to seal the deal, that they lost that series lead. But I think everyone sees the progress that's been made by this team and sees the hope for the future. Drew Doughty, like I said, has always been one of the most vocal players out there on this team about accelerating the rebuild, about bringing in guys from the outside to help fill holes in the roster, to help elevate this team. And I think that the same is going to be looked at for next season. Obviously, you want to leave room for your guys like Quentin Byfield, Rasmus Kupari, your young players who stepped in, started making a difference. Arthur Kaliev, who by the end of the playoffs, I feel like was playing a lot on the top line with Anze Kopitar and Adrian Kempe. It'll be interesting to see where he winds up next season, line-wise. But Obviously, you want to leave room for those guys to develop. You're not going to send Arthur Kaliyev back to the AHL at this point, for example. He was up here all season. He's not going back. Quentin Byfield, same with him. I can see a case for sending him to the AHL, but at this point, keep him. Let him learn here. He'll get it or he won't get it, and you'll deal with that when you deal with it. But he'll get it. That's a whole other show. But you do have to find a careful balance, and I don't envy Rob Blake any hockey GM, hockey ops people of having to find that balance of we need to bring in that one next guy to help get us to the next step, but also still leaving room for the guys who you are hoping to build around. So it's going to be a delicate balancing act to see what they do. Obviously, everyone is hoping that some change happens on the blue line. I'm going to be curious to see what happens in goal. Obviously, they've invested a lot in Cal Peterson, and I think are going to be hoping that this season was just a blip, an anomaly, and it doesn't happen again, that he is, back to form for next season. But, if he struggles, the Kings are going to have a lot more questions that they're going to have to answer in regards to goal. Sure, Jonathan Quick had an amazing season, amazing postseason for the most part, but he's not going to be able to do that forever, and you really do need a plan. And if Cal Peterson isn't it, if he's not going to be able to get back to where this team thought he would be, they've got to figure it out real quick. So the clock is ticking on that, I think, and of course, as soon as I feel like get past the Stanley Cup, everyone's going to start thinking about trades again, which means that everyone's going to start thinking about Jake Chychrun over in Arizona, and can we trade for him? Can we add him to the blue line? I think he'd be a huge addition, and it's just going to depend on what Arizona is going to want in exchange for him, if they trade him at all. I know in his own exit interviews with Arizona, he seemed kind of checked out. His answers didn't seem like the answers of a guy who was super excited to stick around for like the 8,000th rebuild. So it'll be interesting to see, is he amenable to a trade? How much leverage does he have? But Kings fans, I know, are already turning to look towards him. Obviously, Blake gave away nothing in terms of direction for next season. It's way too early to think about that. But as always, scoring is just such a huge problem for the Kings. There's no good reason for it. Special teams, again, another huge problem. And that comes with coaching and deployment of players. If your guys aren't in the right spots, if your guys aren't moving around correctly, they're not going to score. They're just not going to do it. And obviously also no indication on any changes there as well. I believe Blake did indicate that everyone on the coaching staff is still under contract for next season. Whether that was a veiled confirmation that everyone's going to be back no matter what we think, maybe. But we'll have a lot to keep an eye on here over the summer, particularly as some of these more higher profile unrestricted free agents, aka Philip Forsberg, as we start to learn what they're going to do. The Kings already also confirmed that signing Adrian Kempe to a long-term deal is one of their priorities. I feel like if you had asked me about that last season, if you would have said, what do you think about the Kings giving Kempe like a 5-7 year deal or something, I would have said, why? Why would you do that? He's not, what has he done to show you he deserves that? But this season was such a great surprise. Kempe finally being used to his strengths in this season. I still would be wary. I'm sure his agent's going to have a field day with how well he did whenever they have to negotiate contracts. His agent's going to be like, look at this great season. So they're going to have to be very careful to not fall into the trap of paying for one good season when the rest of his body of work is a little underwhelming. But I don't have an opposition to getting him signed to a long-term deal. I think they just need to be careful, with the things we always care about, with term, with money, and flexibility. You don't want to give Adrian Kempe a full no move, no trade clause. Don't do that. You might need to move him at some point. But I don't hate it. I think that he has really gotten into a groove. I like the fact that they've paired him with Kopitar and that those two have seemed to get a good relationship on the ice. And yeah, bring him back. Let's see what he can do. Just don't overpay him, please. We're going to have enough problems eventually. this is now the time of year where we get to speculate, where we get to figure out who's available, who might be up for a trade, and who the Kings can add. We've got all sorts of cool off-season content for you as we wind our way through the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like I said, tomorrow we're going to take a focus specifically on the Ontario Reign. We also learned a few Reign updates in Rob Blake's press conference, the exit interviews as well, so we'll talk about those tomorrow. So we'll talk about their exit. Also, keep an eye and or ear out for we're going to do the now second annual Locked on Los Angeles Kings Player Team Awards. You'll get to vote on some of your favorite moments, on your MVPs, your unsung heroes. You'll get to vote on all of those, and we'll talk about them on the show. We'll be doing player season reviews, report cards, whatever, and of course we can't really move in to the off season too far without talking about Dustin Brown. So I'm hoping to get together some cool special programming to honor Dustin Brown, who has called it a career. Game 7 against the Oilers, that was it. He got some nice long prolonged hugs from some players in the line and the handshake line, everyone knowing obviously that this was Dustin Brown's final game. So you'll have ways to contribute yourself to an upcoming special on Dustin Brown. So stay tuned for information on how you can do that, because I'm really going to want to hear from fans on their memories and warm recollections of Dustin Brown. And yes, that does include, you can talk about the Tomas Hertl hit. That's fine. We can talk about that. It's all right. So stay tuned for more on that as well. That is it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, for being here all season long as we go on a surprise fun playoff run, and now wind things down and get ready to watch as some former Kings take a run at the Cup. We'll talk about them as well as we watch the remaining postseason for the NHL. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at RightSaidSarah. You can find the show on Twitter at LockedOnLAKings. We're available wherever you get your podcasts, available on YouTube, available basically on any fun podcast app of choice. So make sure you've subscribed, that you are getting notifications so you never miss episodes, and come back tomorrow and every day for more Kings news here on Locked On Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.